My son was finally taking his first shaky steps after months of painful therapy. Then that woman, Karen, stood on her porch and laughed when he fell. That's when I knew. I wasn't going to let this slide. I never thought I'd cry over 3 tiny steps across a patch of grass. But when they're your son's first steps after nearly a year in a wheelchair, it hits you like a freight train. My son, Ethan, is 5. And until last year, he was the most energetic little dude you'd ever meet, always running, climbing, falling, and getting right back up. That all changed one rainy night when a distracted driver ran a red light and hit our car. I don't remember the impact, just the sound of twisting metal, the screams, and then silence. Ethan was in the back seat. I was barely conscious when I heard the paramedics say they were airlifting him. That moment split my life in two, before the crash and after. The damage to Ethan's spine wasn't permanent, thank God, but it was bad. Doctors told us he'd need months of physical therapy just to stand again, maybe longer to walk. And even then, there were no guarantees. Those first few months were brutal. Ethan hated the hospital. He hated the braces. He cried when he couldn't move his legs the way he used to. He'd say things like, "Am I broken?" and it would gut me every time. My wife and I tried to stay strong for him, but there were nights we'd cry in the hallway when we thought he was asleep. And then, slowly, things started to change. Physical therapy became a daily routine. We celebrated the tiniest milestones, twitching toes, moving his knees, bearing weight on one leg. I'll never forget the first time he stood up using a walker. The look of pride on his face was like he'd just climbed Mount Everest, so by the time we got to that Saturday afternoon, when he said, "Daddy, can we go outside so I can try walking on the grass?" I was already a mess of emotions. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Cookie-cutter homes, perfectly trimmed hedges, and the kind of silence that makes you feel like everyone's watching. The HOA here is strict but tolerable, except for one person. Karen. Yeah, that's her real name. And no, the irony isn't lost on me. Karen lives 2 houses down. She's the type who sends emails about trash cans being out too early, and once called the HOA over a non-regulation garden gnome someone put up for Halloween. She's always been cold to us, especially after the accident. Never said a word to Ethan, never once asked how he was doing. Just watched us from her porch like she was waiting to report us for something. Anyway, I wheeled Ethan out to the front yard, and we set up next to the sidewalk. I brought his walker out, but he looked up at me and said, "No walker today. I want to try without it." My heart stopped. "Are you sure, buddy?" He nodded, serious as ever. "I've been practicing with Mom inside. I can do it." So I got down on my knees in front of him, just a few feet away, arms open, just in case. "You got this," I whispered. Ethan stood, wobbly, legs shaking, but standing. And then, step, step, step. 3 steps. Then he tripped. Not hard. He landed on his knees and caught himself. No tears, just a frustrated little grunt. He looked up at me like he was embarrassed, and I was about to rush to him when I heard it. Laughter. Not warm, not amused. Mocking. Cruel. I turned my head and saw Karen, sitting on her porch, arms crossed, watching like it was a soap opera. She actually chuckled and shook her head. My brain couldn't process it at first. Surely I misheard. Surely she was laughing at something else. Then she said, loud enough for me to hear across 2 lawns, maybe he should try walking somewhere less uneven, or just stay inside if he's gonna fall all over the place. I stood up so fast I startled. "Ethan." My blood pressure shot through the roof. My fists clenched. I didn't even know what to say. What do you say to someone who laughs at a 5-year-old learning to walk again? But I didn't want to scare Ethan. So I walked over, knelt down beside him, and said gently, "You did amazing. Those were the best steps I've ever seen." He smiled a little. "Even if I fell?" "Especially because you got up." I picked him up and carried him inside while Karen just sat there, smug on her porch like she'd said something clever. I could feel her eyes on my back the entire time. That night, I couldn't sleep. My wife tried to calm me down, told me to ignore her, that Karen wasn't worth it. But it wasn't about me. It was about Ethan. That moment should have been one of the happiest in his recovery. Instead, it was tainted by someone's cruelty. I wasn't going to let her get away with that. I wasn't going to let Ethan grow up thinking that people could just mock him for trying. That night, something clicked. In me, Karen had picked the wrong dad to mess with. The next morning, I replayed that moment in my head a dozen times. I kept seeing Ethan's little face when he tripped, and then hearing her, that laughter, that smug, nasty voice drifting across the lawn like poison. I'd dealt with petty HOA stuff before. Trash can complaints, a strongly worded letter about inadequate lawn edging. But this wasn't that. This wasn't just nosy or annoying. This was cruel. The thing that stuck with me most wasn't even the laughter. It was what she said. That comment about Ethan staying inside if he couldn't walk properly. It wasn't just tone deaf. It was intentional. She saw him fall and decided to twist the knife. I wasn't going to let it go. That morning, I checked my doorbell cam footage. I had installed one of those high-end models with audio last year after a string of package thefts. I scanned back to yesterday afternoon, hoping, praying, that it had caught her voice. It did. The clip started with Ethan stepping across the grass. You could hear me cheering him on in the background. Then the fall. Then, clear as day, Karen's voice, dripping with sarcasm. Maybe he should try walking somewhere less uneven, or just stay inside if he's gonna fall all over the place. I stared at the screen, jaw clenched. My hand hovered over the share button for a long time. But I didn't click it. Not yet. I wasn't after petty vengeance. I wanted everyone. In this community, the HOA, the board, all her friendly porch gossip buddies, to know exactly who she was, and to see it with their own eyes. So I started planning. That week, I didn't interact with Karen at all. No glares, no comments. I wanted her to think she got away with it. Meanwhile, I talked with a few neighbors, casually at first. So, what do you think of Karen? The answers weren't surprising. Most people didn't like her, but they tolerated her because she was loud, persistent, and always the first one to run to the HOA board. She had influence. The kind of influence that came from intimidation, not respect. One neighbor told me Karen once reported a kid for using chalk on the sidewalk. She said it was vandalism, he said, rolling his eyes. It was a drawing of a flower. Yeah, that tracked. Another neighbor, Mrs. Bennett, the sweetest woman on the block, lowered her voice when I asked and said, "That woman has ice in her veins." She called code enforcement on my daughter for parking too close to her own driveway. On Thanksgiving, I was starting to see a pattern. Then came the tipping point. Thursday afternoon, just 4 days after the fall, Karen walked by my house with her little yappy dog. She didn't say a word to me, but she looked at Ethan, who was practicing walking again with his therapist in the driveway, and smirked. Not smiled. Smirked. That was it. I opened my laptop, compiled the footage, added the clip of her laughing and her nasty comment. Then I added a short caption overlay on the video. This is how a member of our HOA treats a 5-year-old recovering from an injury. No yelling, no name-calling, just the facts. Let people see for themselves. Then I emailed the video to the HOA board. I knew 2 of the members personally, Mr. Carter and Lisa Tran. Both were decent folks who'd come to Ethan's fundraiser months ago. I attached a short message. Dear board, I wanted to bring this to your attention. This clip shows what happened outside my home on Saturday afternoon while my son, Ethan, was practicing walking after recovering from spinal trauma. A comment was made that I believe violates the spirit, and possibly the ethics, of our community standards. Please take a moment to review the video. David M.I. didn't expect fireworks. I just wanted accountability. But what happened next? I wasn't ready for that. By Friday morning, the video had made its rounds, not just among the board, but the whole neighborhood. Apparently, Lisa had forwarded it to a few people, asking for input on community behavior. And it spread. Started getting texts. Hey, just saw the video. What the hell is wrong with her? Man, that made me sick. Ethan's a champ. Anything we can do to help? Even people I barely knew started reaching out. A neighbor I'd only waved to in passing stopped me while I was getting the mail and said, You're handling this with a lot more grace than I would have. That kid of yours is amazing." The shift was immediate. That Friday evening, the HOA called a special meeting. And guess who didn't show up? Karen. But that didn't stop people from talking. One after another, neighbors spoke up. About her. About the pattern. About how people were tired of her bullying, the passive-aggressive notes, the endless complaints. Someone even printed out a transcript of the video and handed it to the board. That night, the board voted to issue a formal community conduct warning to Karen. It wasn't much in the legal sense, but it went on record. And more importantly, it publicly signaled that the neighborhood was done protecting her. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't send her a text. I didn't post about it. But I did take Ethan out front the next day. This time, with a little finish. Line drawn in chalk, he walked 8 steps, didn't fall once. The neighbors clapped. Karen's porch? Empty. After everything that happened, it felt like the neighborhood had woken up from a long sleep. People who'd never said more than hello suddenly wanted to talk. Neighbors I'd barely known brought over cards for Ethan, small gifts, and even asked if he wanted to come play once he was up to it. The community that once felt like a cold, rule-obsessed collection of fences now felt like an actual neighborhood. And Karen? She vanished, at least socially. That porch she used to occupy like a sentry post? Empty. The woman who once scoured the block like a hawk for petty violations now barely stepped off her lawn. I saw her peek through the blinds when I was out, with Ethan, but she didn't dare show her face. It was like someone had unplugged her self-righteous spotlight. She wasn't banned. She wasn't fined. But the thing about people like Karen is, they don't need punishment. They need an audience. And when you take away the fear and the obedience, they fold. But that didn't mean I was done. A few days after the HOA meeting, I asked Lisa from the board if they'd consider an idea I'd been thinking about for a while. What? If we hosted a community walkathon? Not for fitness, not for HOA brownie points, just a casual, family-friendly event to raise a little money for local kids in physical therapy, like Ethan. She lit up. "That's actually a great idea," she said. "We've been trying to do something that brings people together again, so we made it happen." The event was small, just a few laps around the community park with a table of snacks and a little donation jar. No sponsors, no fancy flyers, just people coming together for something that mattered. And guess who was the, honorary starter? Ethan. He stood at the front of the crowd with a homemade sign around his neck that read, "Ethan's Comeback Walk." He grinned from ear to ear. One of the neighborhood teens had brought a little Bluetooth speaker and blasted his favorite song while the walk began. It was simple, but it meant everything. He walked a full quarter of the park loop, hand in hand with 2 friends from his kindergarten class. No walker, no braces, just determination and a pair of Lightning McQueen sneakers. I'll never forget the way people clapped for him, not out of pity, but out of pure admiration. He was the smallest one there, but the biggest reason we'd all come together. And Karen? She watched from her front window. I saw the curtain move. She didn't come. Not once. But I didn't care anymore. Honestly, I was glad she didn't. That moment wasn't for her. It was for us. For every time we'd swallowed our anger and kept our heads down. For Ethan, who just wanted to walk like a normal kid. And for this community, which had finally put compassion ahead of control. But karma has a funny way of finishing the story, doesn't it? A week after the walkathon, I got an email from Mr. Carter on the HOA board. It was short, but it made me smile. Subject: HOA Complaint Review. Dear David, you may be pleased to know that a review of community complaints filed over the past year revealed a concerning pattern of behavior from one individual in particular. After discussion, the board voted to strip Karen S. of her status as a community liaison. She will no longer be consulted on compliance issues. Best regards, Carter Boom. She wasn't on the official board, but she'd held an informal position, a sort of self-appointed watchdog, one that the board had foolishly indulged for too long. But now, that title was gone. The tattling, the passive-aggressive reports, The weaponized HOA letters, over. And just like that, she became what she feared most, irrelevant. And you know what? I didn't throw a party. I didn't blast it on social media. Because what really mattered was happening right in front of me. Every single day, Ethan was getting stronger. Last week he ran across the living room, ran, and jumped into my arms. I nearly dropped my coffee. He laughed so hard he gave himself the hiccups, and he said something that brought me to my knees. "Daddy, remember when I fell outside and that lady was mean?" "Yeah, buddy, I remember." "She doesn't laugh anymore. But now people cheer for me." "Yeah, they do, kid, and I will always make sure they do. The world doesn't always give you a clean ending. People like Karen don't always face justice in a courtroom or get dragged on the internet. But sometimes, the best revenge is community, kindness, and a little boy with more courage in his pinky toe than she'll ever have in her whole miserable body." We didn't just take a few steps forward, we left her behind.